ACB logo, ribbon below, 60th anniversary.
Welcome, everyone, to our second annual ACB DC Leadership Conference Fireside Chat. It's exciting to have, for the most part, a new set of participants this year. I think Kirk Adams is a return guest, but for everyone else, we welcome you all for the first time. And really, we appreciate you being here. It's an opportunity for our members to get a chance to meet leaders in the blind and low vision field. And we are very excited tonight to have Cindy Watson, the CEO of the San Antonio Lighthouse from San Antonio, Texas. Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you.
All right. And then we have Kirk Adams, the president and CEO of the American Foundation for the Blind, based in Arlington, Virginia, but Kurt is in upstate Washington right now.
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Down Seattle, Washington.
It's raining.
Kurt. It's raining. Okay, well, you're true to form then.
Right at home.
And then we have Ken Fernal, and he is from AVRE in Binghamton, New York. So welcome, Ken.
Thank you. Happy to be here, and it is snowing. So
it's snowing. We got snow, rain. Cindy, you got better weather in Texas, don't you?
Oh, it's like 68 today.
Very
Sorry,
nice.
guys.
Very nice.
And sunny.
Rub it in a little. It's okay.
Sorry.
And then we have Eric Bridges, Executive Director of the American Council of the Blind from Alexandria, Virginia. Welcome, Eric.
Great to be here.
How have you been doing lately?
Just been kind of hanging out.
Not
much going on.
Not much going on. Welcome. And my name is Dan Spoone, and I'm the president of the American Council of the Blind from Orlando, Florida. So we're really excited to have our guest this evening. And I thought first we would go around and just do a quick introduction of the organization that you work for and share with our members a little of your mission and purpose. So Ken, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. As you said, I'm with AVRE, and that stands for the Association for Vision, Rehabilitation, and Employment. Our mission is to create opportunities for success and independence with individuals who are blind or visually impaired. We are an Ability One organization, so we have an employment program where we employ individuals who are blind or visually impaired. And we also have a rehabilitation program as well. We cover 9 counties in upstate New York. Most of them are very rural. We're about, I think, 65 employees now. I've been with the organization, 32 years now. Started in manufacturing and worked my way up through several layers of responsibility, and I've been the CEO since 2014.
Fantastic. And Cindy, if you could tell us a little bit about Lighthouse San Antonio.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So very much like Ken's organization, the San Antonio Lighthouse for the Blind and Vision Impaired, our mission is to empower people who are blind. And we do this by participating in the Ability One program as well. So we create employment for people who are blind, as well as providing a full array of services, rehabilitation and employment services. So we cover San Antonio and the surrounding counties. We serve about 7,000 Texans adjusting to vision loss each year. And that ranges from early childhood all the way to seniors with the goal of aging in place and adjusting to their vision loss. We have about just under 500 employees, over about half of which are blind or vision impaired, and that those employment opportunities range from CEO all the way to service positions at our base stores, as well as manufacturing opportunities in our manufacturing plant in San Antonio.
Oh, good. Before we go on to Kirk, for Ken and Cindy, both of you, did you start out as NIB agencies and Ability One agencies and then add in rehab services, or is it something you've covered both of those fronts with both the rehab programs and the industries at the beginning of your organizations? I mean, maybe Ken, you first, and then Cindy.
Yeah, we've been around since 1926 in one form or another, and then obviously when Travis Wagner O'Day was started in 1938, or Wagner O'Day, I believe we became involved with that as an Ability One, now Ability One organization at close to that time, and then we started offering vision rehabilitation services in the 60s. So we've been doing it a long time.
Long time with both programs.
Right.
And Cindy, how about at San Antonio Lighthouse?
Yeah, similarly, we actually started out as a service organization. We were founded by the local Lions chapter. And then we, as the JWAD program came online and employment opportunities were created through that program, we started participating. But I would say that our rehab services have grown in terms of scope and size and coverage area significantly over the past 15 years.
Very good. And Kirk, tell us a little bit about AFB and the programs that I know you're under a lot of transformation and kind of settled down here over the last few years.
Yeah. So we're 100 years old. We were founded in 1921, and we've had lots of different focus areas, lots of different programmatic areas over 100 years, obviously. We were founded by professionals in the field. There were two professional associations, an association of teachers of the blind, which are mostly teachers in residential schools, and association of workers for the blind, who were people working in workshops and homes for the blind, and asylums for the blind, and those types of institutions that existed at that time. And both of those associations felt there needed to be a new central nonprofit agency that could use research and data to identify the greatest opportunities for inclusion of people who are blind, the greatest barriers, and then to facilitate collective action around those things. So we're really doing the same thing. We are focused on employment very clearly, and looking to change the landscape in employment by using research and data, creating knowledge, transferring knowledge to decision makers and influencers, facilitating the increased capacity of blind people in leadership, and just looking to change the landscape. And everyone on this call is a great advocate for people who are blind. Everyone on this call is doing great work. It's a privilege to be here.
Thank you, Kirk. And Eric, I know our crowd is mostly fairly familiar, but could you, just refresh everybody on the history of the and background with the American Council of the Blind? Yeah,
we're 60 years old. We're celebrating our 60th anniversary. So been around a while, member-driven organization. We've got 68 state or special interest affiliates. We've got members in every state, and we exist to advocate on the behalf of not just our members, but the broader blind and visually impaired community on a whole host of issues in order to make life, frankly, better for the nation's blind and visually impaired citizenry. And it's been a great ride, I would say, so far. I've been employed by the American Council of the Blind for, it'll be 15 years in June. I've been in my current role for about 5 years, but I've been a member for nearly half my life, since 1999. Starting my senior year of college, I became a member. So, and the advocacy is what got me to become a member. I needed help advocating at my university. And so the folks at ACB got involved and helped me out.
Well, and Eric, since you've got the microphone, for our next question, and everybody kind of knows who Eric Bridges is inside of ACB, but I don't know if they know kind of your life journey. So, take a few minutes, 5-10 minutes, and kind of tell us about the, Eric Bridges growing up as a blind, low vision person, and kind of, your journey to get from, the plains of Iowa to Alexandria, Virginia.
Sure. Actually, I grew up on the Bluffs.
The Bluffs, not the
Cool
plains.
area,
Okay,
yeah.
you were on the Bluff area. My
Yeah,
apologies.
by the
Yeah.
Mississippi, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I was born and raised in Dubuque, Iowa, which is right along the Mississippi River, across from Illinois and Wisconsin, and went to school at the University of Iowa. Began losing my vision at the age of 4, and until I was about 17, and I lost the last bit of vision that I had. And so, growing up, my best advocates were my parents, ensuring that I got a good education, that I learned, Braille when I needed to, that I learned how to use a cane when I was needing to, even though I didn't want to. I had challenges with the school district not wanting to provide me with those accommodations, and my parents actually had to wind up filing a lawsuit to intervene in that. So I learned about advocacy at a pretty young age, at about the age of 11. And so, I went to school at the University of Iowa, got a degree in journalism and mass communications, and I joined a fraternity, and I learned a lot about life being in a fraternity.
I bet.
Yeah, it was pretty great. I also learned it was a window into leadership, and difficult decisions, and having to deal with people who were your friends that were not behaving well. And so, as part of the leadership of that particular chapter, I learned how difficult it can be to be a leader at an early age. And so, it was fun. It was challenging. My high school social life went something like this: Friday nights, looking after my 2 sisters while everybody else was out doing whatever they were doing, right? So I got to redefine myself in college, or define myself, and not
no little sisters in a fraternity. Oh,
that's right.
Yeah, yeah.
Instead of others defining me, I got to define myself and who I wanted to be. And so it was pretty powerful. I did an internship for Senator Tom Harkin in Washington, D.C., and I fell in love with Washington for that summer that I was out here, which it happened to coincide with the 10th anniversary of the ADA. And I was able to participate in a lot of really cool events with the senator and other members of Congress, and decided that I really would like to live out here, and actively began looking for employment opportunities out here, and had lots of doors closed in front of me. But the folks at National Industries for the Blind, helped me. They found out that I was on the Hill, and I got a job. And actually, I was in the waiting room at National Industries for the Blind, waiting to be interviewed, when a guy named Kirk Adams came walking in and sat down. So I've known Kirk since before I had a job, technically. Yeah, but that's what got me out here. And I worked for National Industries for the Blind for several years, about 6 years, doing different work. I learned how to sell products to the federal government for a couple of years. I learned the whole home project through the U.S. State Department. Sold a bunch of mattresses abroad. That was pretty cool. Had never sold anything before. And as well, then I really wanted to get into policy. And so I learned at the feet of a great woman named Pat Beattie, who was a leader in the American Council of the Blind. It's part of how I became interested in ACB. She was the public policy director at ACB, or at NIB, for many years. And she's the one that taught me the bread and butter of going up and making your pitch. And I did that on behalf of NIB and the Ability One program. And that's where and how I got to know better people like Kirk, and eventually Ken and Cindy. So had the opportunity to do a fellowship through the Brookings Institution, and went and worked up on Capitol Hill for nearly a year for a member of Congress from Minnesota, and essentially was the free help in the office, but functioned as a legislative assistant. I had a portfolio of issues. And while I was up there, I learned a lot, covered a lot of different issues that didn't deal at all with disability policy, but lots of things. And during that time, what I really realized is I wanted to come back to the blindness field and advocate on the behalf of our community. And right around that time, the role of Director of Advocacy and Governmental Affairs opened up at ACB. And I applied, and they hired me, and I've been here in different roles for nearly 15 years.
So growing up in public schools and going to Iowa, how much interaction did you have with other blind and low vision, students, peers at that stage of your life?
Almost none.
Mm-hmm.
There was another kid. His name was Derek. He was in the same grade that I was in. He had star guards and really barely needed any sort of magnification. And here I was going from having very good vision, participating in sports, to losing my depth perception and not really being able to participate in sports, and refusing to use a cane, and bumping into glass door dividers.
Oh, I remember those
stuff,
days.
right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. I hate glass door dividers to this day.
Glass doors, period.
Well, yeah, there's that too. Yeah. Amen. But yeah, I didn't have other peers. And so it made things challenging. I mean, I was already like just a ball of confidence with my acne and my braces, in high school. And then you add on the fact that I was losing my vision, and most of it was gone, by my junior year. So it's like, oh yeah, this is wonderful. And I didn't really have anybody else to talk to about it, which is part of what made the student affiliate in ACB so attractive to me once I got to college.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you met your wife through ACB, right?
I did. We weren't both working here, so let's just get that out of the way. But yeah, I met Rebecca while I was working for National Industries for the Blind, which is in Alexandria, Virginia, just across the river from Washington, where the ACB national office was then located. She was doing an internship at ACB, and we were introduced through a mutual friend, and literally have been together ever since. So that was the summer of 2003 that we met.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah.
Cool. So, hey, Ken, so tell us a little bit about your personal story, if you don't mind. We'd love to learn more about you. Yeah.
Yeah, a little different than Eric. Diagnosed almost about the same age. It's about 8 years old when I was determined to be legally blind. Mm-hmm. Macular degeneration juvenile, so very similar to Stargardt's. So I did receive services initially for a number of years, and I was born up here in upstate New York and grew up in Tampa, and then relocated back here. So during my school age in Tampa, the services, they weren't great, and I ended up at some point, probably 7th or 8th grade, becoming kind of vain and decided I didn't want to be that kid that stood out, and convinced my parents that, hey, I don't need those large print books anymore. So was able to manage my way through high school. Family of 6 kids, by the way, myself and my sister. Both of us have the same eye disease. Out of the 6 kids, everybody else is normally sighted. Got to that point where I just wanted to get through high school. That was my goal. No perception of going to college. I wanted to go to work, and that's what I did. Graduated high school, took on a couple different jobs, and matured a lot, and vision got worse. And then I was working for an electronics assembly organization. Ended up getting laid off and decided at that point that I was going to go to community college. And then lo and behold, once I started accepting services again, I'm like, hey, I'm actually pretty good at this stuff, and was able to succeed. So I ended up going on, finishing my associates and then a bachelor's degree as well, and have been at, as I mentioned before, AVRE, 32 years. So started in manufacturing part-time, worked into full-time manufacturing, then into a role of started up the quality assurance testing lab, and then became the quality assurance manager, and then took on, it's been too many years now, director of industries, new business development. Then I was promoted to VP of operations, sat in that role for about 12 years. And then as my predecessor was approaching retirement, I was groomed to be able to compete for this position as CEO. So happy to be here. Been, in that role, as I mentioned before, since 2014. Gonna go a little personal life as well. Been married for 30, coming up on 33 years. We have 2 grown children. My son is 28 and married. Kirk, we're waiting for that day, as you talked about a little bit earlier, to become grandparents at some point. And my daughter is 23, and she is a phys ed teacher with an emphasis on adapted phys ed. So we're proud of her as well. So I think that covers a lot of it, Dan. That's.
So when did you kind of first really get involved with others that were going through or had blindness or vision loss? Was that kind of, maybe it sounds like perhaps after your high school years?
Yeah, no, I didn't have any of the kids that were visually impaired that I went to high school with. And started to run into a couple individuals during college. And then actually, I mean, kind of an interesting story, when I ended up going to work for AVRE, that was the last place I wanted to go for work. It was my perception of what it was then. It was the Blind Work Association. My perception was not great. So when I finally did, I was newly married, laid off, going to college. I needed a job, and had, as Eric mentioned, a number of doors that were closed for me because of my vision, but needed to go to work. So my voc rehab counselor convinced me to go check out what was Blind Work Association, and my opinion changed the first day. It wasn't what I perceived it to be, and certainly we're totally different organization now than we were then 30 plus years ago. So that was really, my first introduction to working with large numbers and socializing with large numbers of people with vision loss or totally blind.
More as work colleagues at that point in time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
Oh, very interesting.
Yep.
And how was the adjustment from Tampa to upstate New York?
It's different, but we really like it here. It's a great community. So I'd rather live here now at my age than in Tampa at this point. Maybe when I get ready to retire, there might be some wintering down in that area, but we really like this area.
Well, there you go. You can be a typical Florida snowbird.
There you go.
Lots of them.
Absolutely.
Oh, well, welcome. Cindy, would you mind sharing a little of your personal journey?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So it's so interesting to hear these stories. I have friends on this panel that I'm learning so much about today.
It's great. I love it. Yeah,
a lot of similarities. So I was diagnosed with juvenile macular degeneration at the age of 9. And like Ken and Eric, I hadn't met another blind individual until I think I was a sophomore in high school. There was a junior high new kid that enrolled in our school district her name was also Cindy, and she was totally blind. And we didn't have a lot of interaction, but it was just interesting to actually meet another person who was going through a similar experience. But I spent a tremendous amount of energy and many, many years trying to fake being sighted. And I socked away my large print volumes of books in my locker and wouldn't bring them to class, and threw my Coke bottle glasses in the locker because I didn't look cool in them, and resisted using a cane and all of the things. And, you know, sometimes I reflect upon that and I think how it would have really been great to have had some blind mentors to really help me understand how, you know, to embrace the diverse, who I am as an individual and as a person who's blind. But, you know, we all have our own journeys and we learn a lot from those journeys, even if it's the hard way, right? And so, anyway, so I went to school in Galveston County, which is south of Houston, and went to the University of Houston, Clear Lake for both undergraduate school and graduate school. When I finished my special ed degree, bachelor's degree, I was trying to decide where I wanted to work, and I had a less than ideal student teaching experience at in the town where I grew up, and so I wasn't quite sure what my career was going to look like. And my voc rehab counselor from the Texas Commission for the Blind encouraged me to apply for a vocational rehabilitation teacher position, of which I had zero experience. Like, I'd met, you know, one other blind person and I faked being sighted. So what the heck was I going to teach these clients? But I applied and they hired me. And so I will tell you, I learned a tremendous amount probably learned more from the clients that I served than I taught them. They taught me so much. We just learned how to be problem solvers together and figure things out. But it helped me tremendously. I learned so much and adjusted to my vision loss through that experience as a rehab teacher. So I was with the Commission for the Blind for 8 years in various roles. I was a case manager, also did some employment assistance working with community employers and college-bound and job-ready clients over that 8 years. And then I left the state and went back to school to get my MBA. And I thought that I was, you know, closing the chapter on my serving people with vision loss and embracing this exciting new career in business. And when I finished my MBA program, one of my colleagues who was looking for internships came across the National Industries for the Blind Fellowship for Leadership Development Program, and he sent me the link. And I had heard about Ability One a little bit through the work that I did with the Lighthouse of Houston, but wasn't really familiar. And so I applied for the fellowship and I was hired. So for 2 years, I had three 8-month rotations during those 2 years. 1 8-month rotation in South Texas, in Corpus Christi at the South Texas Lighthouse, and the second 8 months at NIB headquarters in Alexandria, and then the last 8 months in Las Vegas at the Blind Center of Nevada. And during that 2 years, I was also involved with the business management training at University of Virginia, Darden School of Business. So like a mini MBA, kind of a refresher what I just learned during the MBA program. But it was unique because I had the opportunity to actually study a nonprofit agency as a project. So I got some application experience through that program, and it was really good for me because I wasn't working while I was in my MBA program. So it gave me some tangible experience of applying those skills. So when I finished the 2-year program, I went from like, what am I going to do with this degree to where do I want to go? I had a lot of agencies that were recruiting me to come to work for them. And my husband followed me around during these 2 years.
Were you married at the time?
Yes,
Okay.
all 20 years, I will say. He's followed me around all 20 years. But so he was going to school while I was involved in the fellowship program, and he got recruited to go to work for Schlumberger out of Houston, which took us back to Houston. Yeah. And I went to work for the Winston-Salem Industries for the Blind and worked remote for them for the first 4 years doing business development. And then we moved to Winston-Salem for the last 4 years that I worked for them. And during that time, I was recruited to serve on Kirk's AFB's national board, and got to know AFB, fell in love with their programs. And one of their long-term leaders retired, Judy Scott, who was running the Center on Vision Loss and Web programs. Mm-hmm. And so I was recruited to come back to Texas. There's a theme here in my journey.
Of that yo-yo back.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so back to Texas we go. And so I was with AFB for about a year, and Kirk and I had just a small overlap. And then I was with the Dallas Lighthouse for a year. And then I was recruited to become the senior vice president at the Seattle Lighthouse for the Blind. And was there for 3.5 years, 2.5 years as the president and CEO. And then about a year ago, one of my many mentors, Mike Gillum, who was the CEO of San Antonio Lighthouse, announced that he was retiring. And it was a really hard decision for my family to make. My husband was settled again, started over again. He was at Blue Origin as an engineer and was loving it. My kids loved the Pacific Northwest. But to have the opportunity to come back to Texas and lead one of the best organizations, I think, in the Ability One program was an opportunity that I just could not pass up. And so I joined the San Antonio Lighthouse in August of last year. So we are settling into San Antonio, and it's great to be back in Texas.
And how, you mentioned your husband a couple of times. How did he deal with your journey? And what occupation does he have that apparently he has some flexibility to be able to relocate? And how did the kids handle it? Yeah.
I would say I would say that I say often that he must love me a lot because he's an engineer by training, and he was in oil and gas out of Houston. When we moved to North Carolina, he was working internationally, so he just needed to be near an airport. So he had flexibility then. When we made the move to Seattle, he actually changed careers and went from oil and gas to aerospace. And now he's a stay-at-home dad, and he is shuttling the kids to golf and baseball and this and that and everything, and also remodeling a home that we just built. So yeah, he loves me. That's all I can say.
I will hear from Kirk, but I hear a reoccurring theme here that to be a leader of an organization, it comes with a very supportive spouse, and I understand that completely. So Kirk, we'd love to hear your personal story a little bit.
Okay, well, it's going to sound a lot more linear and planned than it really was, but all's well that ends well. So I was born a sighted kid in Aberdeen, Washington. My parents were still in college. They were getting certified to become teachers. And then they had their first teaching jobs, had a little brother came along. And then my retinas both detached when I was in kindergarten. And I became totally blind at 48 hours, something like that.
Oh, wow.
So I had my first, first of many unsuccessful, painful retina surgeries at age 5. And, at that time, my parents were told that I couldn't come back to the neighborhood school. I had to go to the state school for blind kids. So We were living north of Seattle. They visited the Washington State School in Vancouver. They were not very impressed with what they saw there at that time. Now it's an awesome school, but my retinal surgeon was at University of Oregon Medical School in Portland, and someone in his office said, the Oregon State School is great, and so we went and visited. I still have some memories of my first visit there, and they liked what they saw. They quit their jobs in Washington State, moved the family down to Oregon so I could go to the Oregon State School, and I did that for first, second, and third grade. And I'll tell you, as a research-based organization, I'm going to tie a little research in here from time to time. So if you look at success factors in regards to employment, so successful blind employment, one of the main success factors is blindness skills. So O&M skills, ability to read and write in whatever the chosen format is, use of technology. So I was there first, second, and third grade with another 100 other blind kids, and I was drilled in blindness skills. So just became a very strong Braille reader. The model was that you would get your skills to the point where you could go to public school. So starting in third grade, I went to the School for the Blind in the morning and then traveled independently I guess I was 8, about 12 or 14 blocks to a local public elementary, went there. And then in fourth grade, jumped right into sink or swim in public school in small town America. And it was it was very much sink or swim, and I learned to swim and rapidly. And another success factor is high expectations. My parents had very high expectations. They expected me to get good grades. My dad's a high school basketball coach, expected you're involved in sports, you're part of the community. They didn't necessarily know how to support me in doing those things as a blind person, but they certainly had those expectations. And like others who've gone before me, we had no connection with blind people at all. There was never another blind student in any school I attended. Again, living in small towns. We moved back to Washington State when I was in high school. And that's where I got another success factor, which is early employment experience. And it again had nothing to do with me. I was interested in sports. I became the sports editor for the high school paper in Snohomish, Washington. And along with that came a weekly column in the Snohomish paper, the Snohomish Tribune. So I got to write a high school sports column every week and interview coaches and players and fill out my timesheet and get paid and foolishly spend that money.
So Kirk, you got to do that. You got to do that. And I was working at Taco Bell and Pizza Hut in the summer.
I saw your Facebook page today.
Yes.
Well, yeah. And then, I was in the college-bound track. There were about 30 of us. We'd have, senior year, I had physics first period, math analysis second period, chemistry third period. Walked into my chemistry class. The chemistry teacher said, it's not safe. You can't do chemistry. You can't take this class. And I didn't have advocacy skills. My parents really didn't have advocacy skills. So it was just, okay, I didn't take chemistry. I was told a blind person couldn't do it. Now, of course, I've met PhDs in chemistry who are blind, and chemistry professors who are blind. Successful chemists like Dan Berlin, who started and ran and sold his own company. So, lesson in hindsight. And again, we weren't connected to the council. We weren't connected to the federation. We didn't have any resources. So, for young people today, there are many, many advocates who can help you on this stuff, and they're easy to find thanks to the internet. So colleges would come and make their presentations, and we'd always want to get out of class to go to the presentation. So a guy from Whitman College in Walla Walla came, and it's a small private liberal arts school with a good regional reputation. And he asked me to stay after class, after the session, and he said, we are affiliated with a foundation called the Jesse Ridley Foundation out of New York. And we are one of the schools that they will provide full ride scholarships to blind students and we've never had a blind student. And if you would like to apply, I think we can get you that scholarship. So that was my college decision-making process. So I applied for one school. I got a full ride scholarship. Again, mostly through no fault of my own, but I remember I'd have to write them a letter every semester, send my transcript. I had to maintain a 3.25. I'd have to tell them what I learned and what I planned to learn the next semester, and then how much tuition and room and board was, and then they would send me a check. So it was pretty cool as an 18-year-old to get a $22,000 check in the mail.
It's still pretty cool, Kirk.
So I would bank it. I would get $100 bill, and I would go to the Fawcett Tavern, which was in the basement of the Marcus Whitman Hotel. They didn't card, so there you have it. So it's good student. Another thing, I didn't get a lot of support from the Commission for the Blind, but I got, I could hire readers. So again, as a 17, 18-year-old, I was interviewing readers, managing their time, firing some of them, tracking time, submitting invoices, and looking back on it, that's an experience that my other classmates weren't having. So that was I think another success factor is the opportunity to have those responsibilities. Graduated cum laude, Phi Beta Kappa, started applying for jobs. I think doors closing, or was said by a couple of people, lots of doors closed. I wasn't disclosing my blindness in my cover letter and resume. I'd get a phone interview. I'd be asked to come in for an in-person interview. I was clear I wanted to work and live in Seattle. Most public transportation was not available in the towns I grew up in. And I'd get the phone interview. I'd go in for the in-person. I'd have my cane. I'd have my little pad of Braille paper and my slate and stylus. I could take some notes, and confusion would set in on the room. I was applying mostly for financial analyst type positions, and as many of us have experienced, the person across the table could not imagine how a blind person could do the job that I was applying for. So then I started disclosing in my cover letter, I'm blind, this is how I do what I do, this is how I'll do the job. And then I wasn't even getting the phone interviews. And I started casting my net wider and wider. I applied for a position at a small family-owned brokerage firm in Seattle. The sales manager had also gone to Whitman College, was also an econ major, had some common professors. He called them. They said, yes, of course, he can sell tax-free municipal bonds over the phone. So that's what I did for 10 years, 50 cold calls a day, every day, straight commission. And
you learned how to do the asks, didn't you?
I learned how to do that.
Worked well for development later on in your career.
A no was just a 3/4 yes. Dan,
That's
what I was taught.
Yeah.
So, but was able to get married and buy a house and have our kids. And then when I turned 30, I really decided I didn't want to do that for the rest of my life. I got the What Color Is Your Parachute book out of the Talking Book and Braille library. I followed all the exercises, and the conclusion was I should be in the nonprofit sector. I should be in a leadership role, and I should be working on behalf of creating opportunities for people who are blind. And it should be in Seattle. So that was pretty specific.
Luckily, they had they had a lighthouse there.
Yeah. Well, a couple more steps, and I'll try to be brief. But I followed the book's advice, and I identified some CEOs of nonprofits in Seattle that I respected, and I asked the CEOs for informational interviews, and asked, how did you get into the field? What would you suggest? And I had an interview with a woman. I honestly cannot remember her name, but she was the CEO of Planned Parenthood of Western Washington. And she'd also been a securities broker. And she just said, the best way for you to enter this field is become a professional fundraiser. There's such a crying demand for it. And you've just spent 10 years talking to wealthy people about financial matters. And it's a very transferable skill. So I started applying for fundraising jobs and was not getting them because I had no experience. and the newsletter came from the Washington Talking Book and Braille Library. Said we need to raise $200,000 or cancel our evergreen radio reading service. I contacted the librarian whom I'd known for years. I'm a heavy NLS user, and explained this to her and said, how about I volunteer 20 hours a week to raise the $200,000? That'll give me something on my resume. And again, back to research, work experience as far as a predictor of successful employment. Volunteer work experience is just as valuable as paid work experience as far as being a predictor of success. So if you can't find a paid job, volunteer. So I did that. I wrote some grant proposals. Some checks came in, some beginner's luck, and they offered me a position. They created a job for me. My first nonprofit job was with the Seattle Public Library Foundation, raising money for the statewide Talking Book and Braille Library. Did that for about 3.5 years, went back to school, and, determined nonprofit was the life for me. So I went back and got a master's in not-for-profit leadership. Had a couple different fundraising jobs. I was development director for a large nonprofit childcare agency, and I got a call from someone from the Lighthouse for the Blind saying they wanted to start a fundraising program. They wanted to start a foundation. They'd heard there was a blind guy in town who knew how to do that. So my wife and I went in for a tour and an interview, and I, like others, really had no knowledge of Ability One or what it was all about. I knew it had something to do with employment. But at the Lighthouse in Seattle, they have a long-time contract with the Boeing company, and blind and deafblind machinists using computer numerically controlled machining equipment, making parts, and a large deafblind program, and a lot of tactile sign language interpreting going on. I thought it was cool. And we walked out the front door, and my wife said, "You have to come work here." So I was hired to start that fundraising program. And I think like Ken, the organization had a goal of having a blind leader, a blind person in that CEO role. Organization had been around since 1918. The leadership had always been cited. And my predecessor, a gentleman named George Jacobson, he was very determined there would be a blind person to succeed him after 25 years. So after I kind of proved my worth and my value, as I told my kids when they got their first jobs, make yourself indispensable. They created a position for me that hadn't existed before called General Manager of Administration. So I had HR reporting to me, and marketing and communications, and strategic planning and support of the board and things like that. So I did that for several years. George had announced his retirement. The company hired a search firm. They hired me, and I did not have CEO level experience. I had some management experience. I had never run a major P&L, but it was a $27 million a year company at that point. And they put a very deliberate plan in place where we did a gap analysis of what knowledge, skills, and abilities did I need to be successful, and where was I at on each of those, and then they hired someone to do this and put in a development plan for me. Again, so I could be qualified to apply. It was not a guaranteed deal, but they hired a search firm. I put my name forward. I was offered the fabulous opportunity to be president and CEO of the organization. I did that for 8 years, and we grew nicely. We did a strategic plan. We followed it. We increased employment, increased wages, and increased programs. So it was a very good experience. I'm almost done, Dan.
It's a very interesting
story. I've been working
Kirk.
a long time.
Yeah.
When I was hired, the person who hired me said, if I didn't really know the blindness field, said, if you want to know the blindness field, you got to go to the American Foundation for the Blind conference. So I went to my first leadership conference in DC in 2001. It was called Telling Your Story with Statistics. University researchers presenting, program directors from around the country. I was so impressed, and I never missed an AFB leadership conference. I've been to every one since 2001. I think I went to 15 before I became staff. And the next one will be May 2nd and 3rd in Arlington, Virginia, for all of you out there who want to experience a great gathering of dedicated, passionate, smart people. Went to the conference, was asked to join a program committee, was asked to join the board. And then kind of similarly, in a way, my predecessor at AFB, Carl Augusto, had been there 20 plus years. He announced his retirement to the board. Board hired a search firm. I resigned from the board and put my name forward. And after a process, I was offered the opportunity to come to AFB. So speaking of spouses and love, dedication, in May of 2016, my wife and I left our lovely home and yard and garden here in Seattle and moved into a tiny apartment in Brooklyn where I took the F train to the A train to Penn Station every day and went up to the AFB offices. And we did a strategic plan and closed the New York offices, opened a small headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. We then moved to Virginia and lived in an apartment for 3 years. And then COVID, had me working at the dining room table in this apartment in Crystal City. And my wife said, I am going home to Seattle. If you would like to join me, please do.
Come on.
Come on with me.
There'll be a place waiting for you, honey.
Yeah. So I'm back in our house. We bought in 1990 here where we raised our kids. And I guess the other little, I believe leadership is the tool and is the lever that is going to move things in the right direction. So, I'm fortunate to be in a position like others on this call to lead an organization that can really make a difference. And I really felt that I should do whatever I need to do to maximize my ability to have impact as a leader. So I did start a PhD program in 2010. And I was originally on the 4-year plan. It ended up being an 8-year plan, but I did earn my doctorate in leadership and change in 2019. And, I learned a lot through that process, and so much is applicable to the job I have. So.
Fantastic. What a journey. That's
There you
absolutely amazing. We're all learning new things about each other tonight. It's wonderful. Last year when we did the Fireside Chat, everybody said, Dan, you didn't ever say anything about yourself. And so I promised this year I'd at least tell a little bit of my story. So I'll try to do the abridged version like the rest of you. So, I was diagnosed with retinitis pigmentosus when I was 6 years old. And it's one of those things that, you're going to go blind someday, but when you're 6 years old and you still see pretty well and you're running around the neighborhood and playing with all the kids, I didn't really think all that much about it. When I went to school, I always got to sit on the front row. So didn't realize there was any other place to sit in a classroom my entire life except for the front row until I got to college. And my vision got so bad, it didn't matter whether I sat on the front row or the back row. And then I realized when I went to the back row, because I just defiant and dang-gummit, I was going to go sit on the back row, that you learned a lot more on the front row. But anyway, so I kind of, went through public school, same thing. I had light really bothered my eyes. So I had like 3 different pairs of sunglasses, depending on whether I was outside in the bright light or I was in a Publix grocery store with a fluorescent light, or, I was always changing sunglasses back and forth. And really didn't get much support or services from our Division of Blind Services here in Florida, and then went to the University of Florida and studied business. And at that point in time, kind of like you all are sharing, I was kind of getting by the best I could. And so finally it got to be my senior. Well, I'll tell you the other thing. While I was doing that, I went and got a job at the end of my high school career, degree, working at Disney as a part-time employee. So I would work in the summers and Christmases, spring vacations. So when you weren't going to college was the time that Disney really needed extra people. And I worked in the character department. And that was back in the late 70s. They were an America on Parade. And so the employees at Disney, not that the high school students came and did all the parade, but the employees were actually the ones that drove the floats in the parade. But I couldn't drive because I was legally blind. And so there was one job to be an employee in the character department and not drive a float, and that was to be a World War I fighting ace up on the top of a big transportation float with a big 4-foot head. So you would sit, they'd take a forklift and put me up there and seat belt me in this airplane, and I'd go down Main Street waving my arms feverishly back and forth. And I got so exuberant one night that when I shifted to the left, my head popped off. And flash bulbs are just going off everywhere. And I'm like acting like a complete dork and waving back and forth. We got to Frontierland Bridge and they climbed up on the float and stuck the head back on my head. And so you never knew what was going to happen to you, in life. But it was, so then when I got my degree at the University of Florida, I had to decide, was I going to, I got offered a job. This was like a turning point in my life. I got offered a job to be the permanent Main Street Goofy. And my mom was like, take that job. You've been going to school forever. You need to go to, real work. And I was like, at the same time, I got accepted back into the MBA program at the University of Florida. So I said, wow, an opportunity to go to Gainesville for a couple more football seasons. So I turned down the job at Disney and went back to school at the University of Florida and just stayed as a temporary employee at Disney.
No Main Street Goofy for Dan?
No Main Street Goofy. Although I will say the coolest thing I got to do as Main Street Goofy is one day, oh God, I was a huge, fan of music. And so they invite me back behind the castle for a special guest. And it's Jimmy Buffett and his wife and his little 3-year-old daughter. And so I'm in Brer Bear that day. And so Jimmy Buffett comes up to me. You're not allowed to talk, when you're in these costumes. You got to be in character. Right. And so Jimmy Buffett comes up to me and he says, Brer Bear, can my daughter have your autograph? And I'm thinking, this is the strangest thing in life that I am giving Jimmy Buffett my autograph as Brer Bear. But Disney was kind of, yeah.
Dan, I'm a huge Buffett fan, so I appreciate that. We're actually going to go see him for the first time ever in August. So.
Oh, I have seen him countless times in concert. I'm an unofficial parrot head. I actually love Buffett, but yeah, you'll enjoy it. It'll be a great time. He's not getting any younger, but none of us are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I ended up get my MBA, concentrating in accounting at the University of Florida. Back then, they didn't offer the CPA exam in large print or any accessible standards. It's before the ADA. And so I get an interview that Cindy will appreciate this. I get an interview with Exxon, and there's 8 of us out of the MBA program that they fly to Houston to do a 2-day interview, and you put it up in a big hotel and you get to see underground Houston. And we go to what that time was a Houston Oilers football game and all this stuff. So we get back. The other 7 individuals who flew there with me for the interviews all got offered jobs, and I didn't. Shocking, right? As a blind person, they're like, "Oh, you can't see, you can't drive." I said, "No," and so then I said, "Well, I'll go back to Disney. I worked for them for 7 years. I've got my MBA. They'll offer me a job." They said, "Well, Dan, we can offer you a job in the accounting department." I said, "Fantastic. As an accounts payable clerk, we can start you at $2.40 an hour." And I'm like, "But I have my MBA." And they said, "Well, we just need you to, kind of make sure that you can prove that you can do work here at Disney." I'm like, "Well, I've been working for you for 7 years." I said, "Well, but that was different work. You were in the character department and now you're going to be in business." And I said, "Oh, okay." So being I don't know what you'd say, a little frustrated by the whole thing, my high school friend and I opened up a pizza restaurant. I had never made a pizza before in my life. But my college roommate, Lou Nostro, his family owned 3 pizza parlors and Italian restaurants in the Orlando area. So Kirk, what you're talking about, I spent the next 4 months volunteering every day in their restaurant for them to teach me the recipes and how to make the food and how to, deal with customers and, all of that interfacing. And then at the end of that time, we found a location, borrowed money, built our own little pizza parlor next to our Cumberland Farms. And we opened up DG's Pizza. The D stood for Dan, the G stood for Jerry, and we put I's in it to make it look more Italian because we're both, German descent. And we ran that pizza parlor for like the next 7 years. We built a second location. I learned so much. I learned how to deal with employees. I learned, how to do inventory, how to deal with customers, irate customers, employees that didn't show up for work. We had to continue to innovate. We created a whole wall of VHS videos at that point in time. So we were the first people in town to start delivering pizzas, and we deliver you a VHS movie with your pizza, and also go next door to the Cumberland Farms and bring you a gallon of milk if you wanted it. And so, of course, over time, my vision kept getting worse and worse and worse, and I was unable to, see to make the pizzas as well and do those type of jobs. And Domino's came in, and they really started disrupting our business. So at that point in time, I went back to the community college and took a class called High Tech Training for the Disabled, where we went for 9 months, 9 to 5. It was all disabled people. It was the 4th year of the program, but the first time they ever tried to let a blind person in, because they finally got a little bit of synthetic speech going that, that they could do with the old apples. And so I took this program for 9 months. It was a mainframe computer programming class with COBOL and JCL. But what it did, it offered you, if you graduated from the 9-month program, you got an unpaid 3-month internship with one of the major companies that were part of the Business Advisory Council in the Orlando area. So at the end of those 3 months, I got offered an internship at Westinghouse Electric, and went and did that. And then at the end of the 3 months, they offered me the lowest paying job they could offer me, the minimum of the entry-level position to be in the IT department. And I was happy to take it. It was like $2,100, still remember to this day, $2,100 a month, $25,200 a year. And I was on probation for the first 3 months. It was so funny. There was like 7 or 8 of us that started at the same time. And they had me interview, it was like 4,000 people in this campus and, 100,000 people that worked for Westinghouse. And our business unit's chief financial officer, who was responsible for accounting and the IT department, actually interviewed me. His name was Art Vedner. And so one of the first days in the cafeteria, Mr. Vedner walked by and I said, "Hello, Mr. Vedner." And he said, "Hi, Dan." And all the people who started with me said, this is when I first learned this, that there's some real advantages to being blind because you stand out and people, you're visible, in a organization where you're the only blind person, you really, you don't hide, you really do stand out. And so my peers that started with said, the CEO of, power generation at Westinghouse? I said, yeah, I had an interview with him. You all didn't have interviews with him? They said, no. But he wanted to make sure that I was qualified to do the job. And so at the end of the day, I always felt like it was somewhat an advantage to be blind, and that every time I went into a meeting and I met people for the first time, they looked at me usually saying, why is the blind guy here? What's going on? And my goal always was within a month, I want them to be able to say, if we're going to have that meeting, we need to invite Dan Spoone to that meeting because he's adding value. What can I do to add value? And, had a wonderful career at Westinghouse. We got bought 9 years later by Siemens Energy, stayed for 25 years, after those first 5 to 7 years, when you're just learning, I had like 4 promotions in the next 5 years. And so it was really an interesting journey. As my vision did get worse, I finally got introduced to JAWS. I had to transition from the low vision, the CCTVs and that type of stuff. But what you learned as you went further and further along in your career, I always felt my vision had less of a role the higher I went up in the organization, because they, at that point, are so completely hiring you for your skills and your brain. There's many people on your team that can do, the task of word processing or crunching spreadsheets or preparing presentations. It's your ideas and your thoughts that they're paying you for as you go further up in your career and your leadership skills and your project management skills. So I wanted to kind of give you all that kind of maybe as your next thought or story to share with us as you've gone up through your career. How have you seen your blindness play a role for you? And have you seen that you've had to adapt and create new skills as you've gone up the leadership ladder? And Ken, we'll start with you.
Yeah, and I would agree 100% with what you just described, Dan, that, the more senior you become in an organization, the blindness just isn't an issue. Obviously, you need to be able to function on the day-to-day tasks, but that's become less and less of an issue. I think for me, and probably for organizations like ours, that having somebody in a leadership role, especially in a CEO role as a blind person, is just the best example that can be set for all of our stakeholders and employees, that you can achieve at this the highest level as somebody who's blind, and the fact that you can't see as well as somebody else or not see at all becomes less and less of an impact as you become more senior. So that would be my thought on that part of it.
Yeah. And let me ask you, so because Kurt has had an opportunity to change jobs several times, and so has Cindy. It sounds like once you and Eric have gotten more established, you stayed in your same positions. Mm-hmm. Do you think, is it easier or harder to take that next step in your career, or look for other opportunities when you are blind or low vision, or do you think that's not a barrier?
I think it's absolutely a barrier. And again, I've been with the same organization for 30 plus years, but taking the steps within my organization, that they're not given to you. I mean, you have to earn them. And it's regardless of being somebody who is visually impaired or blind within a blindness organization, you still have to bring value. As Kirk said, you have to make yourself indispensable, regardless of that. So, stepping into an organization outside of where my career has been, absolutely. I mean, prior to working where I am, I mean, I did have a handful of jobs as a young person, and it was always difficult making that transition into a new workplace and proving yourself. As blindness aside, you're faced with proving yourself already in a new organization, and then you throw the blindness or vision loss on top of that, and it just gives you one more level that you have to demonstrate that you can get past.
Yep. Cindy, what have been your experiences?
So I would agree with everything that's been said. For me, it's been interesting. Making the decision intentionally after the fellowship program to really pursue my career in serving people with vision loss within the Ability One program or the broader blindness industry, I would say. I just really embrace taking on leadership roles and opportunities to serve nationally on committees, boards, any opportunity that I had above and beyond my day job really opened so many doors for me to develop mentors, both blind and sighted leaders that were mentors and sponsors to me. And so I've just been really blessed with opportunities come my way along the way. And oftentimes when I wasn't even looking at what was next just yet, and stretching my own imagination about what my career aspirations were. I mean, if you'd asked me 15 years ago, are you going to be a CEO one day? I would have probably laughed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, honestly, I think what I've learned is that, my biggest barrier has been the self-limiting, mindset, and overcoming that has really been tremendous and empowering for me, both personally and professionally. But, it also has been unique experience, going into a new role, going into a new organization. Like Ken said, you have to prove yourself. Just because you're in the blindness industry, it doesn't mean you get, a nice little paved way.
Right.
You still have to prove yourself. And there's sometimes people that question whether or not you can do the job as a person who's blind, even in our field, which is maddening, but it's true.
Yep.
And having the opportunity that I had to, follow in Kirk's footsteps at the Lighthouse for the Blind, headquartered in Seattle. I mean, he really paved the way for me in terms of having systems and processes and mindset about having a leader who's blind in the CEO role. Now I'm at the San Antonio Lighthouse, and I'm the first female and the first blind CEO. And that's a really unique situation for me. And I'm finding that there's a lot of things that I need to change, both to create a working environment where I can thrive, but also to eliminate barriers to create more opportunities for the next generation leaders that I hope to have the opportunity to develop. So, that's my comment.
And did you mentioned getting that self-confidence. So did you have like an aha moment with, man, I can do this stuff as good as anybody else? Did you have that, that epiphany, wait a minute, I can do this?
It's interesting. I think it was evolution over the years. I can recall multiple times throughout my career going, okay, you have this. Like you could do this. Everyone else believes in you. Why don't you believe in yourself? And so I think the more you have experience, the more you have success, and the more you have failures and learn from them, the stronger you become professionally, and the more confidence that you build over time. I mean, it comes with experience. It comes with both successes and failures.
And I think you learn more from your failures. I truly do.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You can get kind of full of yourself when things are going good.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So Eric, what are your thoughts in this area?
Yeah. So the role that I had when I was hired by ACB is a very visible role to ACB, to its membership, but also to the rest of the blind community and disability community, overseeing governmental affairs and advocacy, and was fortunate to have the opportunity to work with a team of people from the disability community to pass a bill into law called the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act in 2010. And what dawned on me through that negotiation, we were negotiating with much of the rest of the technology sector at the time, because this law would impact companies like Google and Apple and Comcast, and at the time, Time Warner and AOL and all these large multinational corporations. And we were meeting with them and negotiating the language, and we got the bill signed into law, and it was outstanding. And then it came time to begin to implement that through the regulatory process. And what I came to a pretty quick understanding about was that if we were going to get these companies to actually not just comply with the letter of the law, but to actually make their products more accessible to us, we needed to form relationships with them and not just do the kind of classic advocacy type route where we, yell at them or show up with a lawyer or what have you, which the disability community has traditionally done with corporate America, and at times with very good reason, right? But rather to offer a hand in collaboration to figure out how we could work with them to make their product or service more accessible to us, given that it was already going to be required. And so we forged really excellent relationships with some of the largest companies in the world, starting in, through the course of that negotiation, and then into 2012, 2013, 2014. And lo and behold, what happened was the arc of the advocacy that ACB was doing was evolving to better meet the needs, at least in this area of our advocacy, of our community. And so being able to have really good and frank discussions with these companies who had become our partners, had seen the value in the relationship that had been built, had begun to attend our conventions, had begun to sponsor our events, had sought us out to provide focus groups for products or services that they were looking to launch at some point in the future. These were all things that were now happening. And as that was evolving, the job became quite a lot larger than when I had come initially in 2007. And but a lot of it was necessary because we had this law and we had these requirements, and we could have just sat back and let the letter of the regulations sort of rule the day, but that would have meant a pretty low compliance bar, and a lot of folks probably would not have been all that thrilled with the level of accessibility that they would have experienced. And I'm not saying everything is perfect today. It's far from it. But what I would argue is that us taking that sort of deploying that strategy to engage actively and partner and collaborate where possible with portions of corporate America has brought greater accessibility in employment and in education, as well as entertainment, than we've had at any time in recent history. And so, it continued on when I was interviewed by the search committee for the board, and had the opportunity to talk with them about what I had been up to. And it sort of didn't, I understood what I was doing, but it sort of hit me at that point that my job had never gone away from advocacy and governmental affairs, but it had sort of transformed itself necessarily. And now there was a relationship management, even you could argue through the advocacy work we were doing, there was a development component that had grown out of it, where we had started to raise significant amounts of money for our convention, our annual convention. And so while I didn't have budget responsibility and I didn't have experience with that or with other aspects of being a CEO or executive director, I had grown the job that I had into something that was different than what I had come with, and I had provided real value to the organization. And I was offered the position, and I gladly accepted.
Fantastic. We're glad you did.
Continued to learn since.
Always. You never stop learning, right?
No.
So, Kirk, how about you? What are your thoughts in this area?
Boy, so many. First off, let's give a shout out to Lighthouse for the Blind Inc. in Seattle, Washington. They gave me an opportunity to be a CEO for the first time. They gave Cindy an opportunity. And now George Abbott, also a former AFB staff person, is in his first CEO position here in Seattle. So organizations who lead, who have a commitment to develop blind leadership and create opportunities for blind people to be in leadership roles, there aren't enough. Ken said his organization was intentional about that. AFB obviously has always had a blind chief executive, as had ACB. So there aren't that many. Mm-hmm. When you look at our field, you see a very small percentage of agencies being led by people who are blind, very small percentage of board members being people who are blind. And then when you look outside of our field, it's been kind of a non-starter. So we know 35% of working age blind adults are in the workforce. Half the workforce participation rate of the general population. And again, we're research folks at AFB. So over half the blind people who are employed work for government or nonprofit. So which is a beautiful thing. Yep. But when you look at the corporate side of things and you look at the C-suite, I'd say there's statistically zero blind individuals, and the Fortune 100 anyway. And then when I did my dissertation, I interviewed blind adults who self-identified as being successfully employed at major corporations, and all of them had their stories, but there were themes, and one of the main themes was disappointment. People were disappointed that they weren't able to move up the org chart more briskly. They were disappointed that people who they felt added less value to their organization were being promoted and given opportunities for more responsibility that they weren't. So I have the utmost respect for everyone on this call, what you've done, what you're doing. I would say we're a pretty small subset here, and I really my guess my soapbox would be, within our field, more organizations need to do what they did in Binghamton and what they did in Seattle, and that's be intentional about helping people who are blind build the capacity and the capability to be in the positions to be considered for these leadership roles, and then to take some risks. There were risks taken that have furthered the careers of people in this chat, and a handful of others out there. But we certainly need more organizations to step up. We know who the organizations are in the field. We also know how old the CEOs are. So
there's opportunity.
There's going to be a nice wave of open opportunities here. So from whatever position of influence we're in, I think it's incumbent upon us as leaders in the blindness field to help support other organizations in creating these opportunities.
Fantastic. I'm going to try and keep you all not just a couple extra minutes, but I want to end this on kind of a funny note. So I'll go first, but I want everybody to kind of think of a good blind story that kind of might have been embarrassing, might have been a little different, but you had to kind of roll with in a leadership position. And I'll go first while you guys think. And, I was, managing several projects towards the end of my career at Siemens, and one of them was a global project. And so we were implementing a solution that to really help manage what we called our long-term program fleet, which was about a $12 billion fleet worldwide, and liquidated damages could be $100,000 a day if you didn't get these power plants serviced on time. So it became really mission critical for us to develop a process and a system to be able to easily estimate at any point in time how we were doing on our outages, we were staying on budget, do we have the resources we needed. So I was running a project team to kind of create the solution, the IT solution for this long-term program package and packages. And so we had a team that we had put together of both folks from America and folks from Germany, and we were meeting at the top of the C-suite over in Erlangen, Germany, which was the world headquarters for the Siemens Power Generation business unit. And so the team had already assembled. We had, typically you'd have the Americans on one side and the Germans on the other side. And in Germany, it was always a very nice custom that you started every meeting by walking around and shaking each other's hands, kind of clockwise, counterclockwise as you, kind of sat down to run the meeting. Well, I was detained in another meeting, so I was late getting to the project review. And so they had saved me a seat at the end of the table, and the meeting was already underway. And one of our other leads was kind of going through the list, the checklist of critical items and where we were on the different items. So I sat down at the end of the table, and we, in typical fashion, everything is done, at least at that point in time, 10 years ago in corporate America, was done with PowerPoint slides on a projector on a wall, and everybody is sitting around and following on the PowerPoint presentation. So I walk into the meeting, I'm sitting at the end of the table, and we're going down, they're on my item 2 or 3. And of course, item 4, I had a question on, when will we get those resources? How sure are we that the resources will be provided? So I always had this thing in my head, even though I couldn't see the PowerPoint slide, I could see the square of light, and so I would, point to the PowerPoint and say, all right, item number 4, what are we going to do? Joe, when are those resources going to get done? Winfred, where do we think we're at here? And, so we went down, and I don't know, we were on about line 7 or 8. And one of the guys who I'd known for a long time, he actually was on our team, but he had actually hired me at Westinghouse, my original mentor when I started at Westinghouse. And John all of a sudden yells out in the meeting, "Dan, stop!" And I'm like, boy, John, you're kind of being insubordinate here. I'm thinking to myself, we're in the middle of a meeting. He said, "Stop, you got to stop now." And I said, "Why do I have to stop now, John?" He says, "Because you keep pointing to that open window on the right side of the room, and everybody looks over there every time you point. The PowerPoint is on the other wall." And I said, "Oh, okay. Sorry about that. Thanks." And everybody broke out laughing, and we had the best meeting. He said, "Every time you point to that window, everybody turns around and looks over there." So anyway, you never know what's going to happen to you when you can't see. So, who wants to go next? I know everybody's had one of those moments.
Well, I was at a meeting at Google with the guy that oversaw Google search. He's not there anymore. His name is Alan Eustace, and he was one of the senior leaders of Google. And he came in, and it was myself and somebody else from ACB and like 4 or 5 Google employees. And we were having this great meeting, and he got up to say goodbye, and he shook my hand, and my guide dog got up and proceeded to puke on the floor on his foot. So yeah, good times.
Oh, Eric, I don't know if I ever shared this with you, but I went to high school with Alan Eustace. We graduated together. He's like the most famous alumni from my high school.
No way.
Yeah. Maynard Evans
Oh,
High
good.
School in Orlando, Florida. He was a very quiet guy in high school. It, wasn't really.
He's a nice man. I
Very
met with
nice.
him a few times. He oversaw all the engineering for a period of time at Google, and then oversaw search. And
he kind of helped develop their search engine back
absolutely.
in the day, I think. Yeah.
He left a very wealthy man. Yeah.
I'm sure he did. Yeah. All right.
Okay, I'll go next.
Okay, Cindy.
So just a quick aside. So one of the major development opportunities for me as I was progressing in my leadership roles was public speaking. I had this absolute fear of speaking in front of large groups. And so I got involved in the Toastmasters organization in Winston-Salem, got really involved. I got involved in leadership, went to state competition. I mean, I just really leaned in because I knew that I needed to overcome and develop skill to work through this paralyzing fear that I had of speaking in public. And so I did that, and I built some confidence, although I was still terrified whenever I got in front of groups. And I was asked to present, and I knew that this was a development opportunity to present to the board. I didn't have board-facing relationship at that point in my career. So being asked to participate in a board meeting and to present to the board was a big deal for me at that time. And so I was asked to give an overview of a couple of the projects that I was working on. And so one of the projects that I was working on was the U.S. Coast Guard T-shirt, which it was a navy blue T-shirt. It had some embroidery that's the U.S. Coast Guard. And so I'm describing the T-shirt, and I said, the embroidery on their left breast. And I didn't even realize what I had said. I was probably just so nervous. I was anyway. So there was a little bit of a chuckle in the room, but I just didn't register until after the meeting when someone had given me let me know what I had actually said and instead of what I meant to say. So not necessarily blindness specific, but definitely embarrassing.
Well, yeah, exactly so. Yeah. Oh. All right, Ken or Kurt, you got something for us?
Well, it's not as high level as some of these other examples, but I was at the Lighthouse. I was the development director, and we were in Washington, D.C., visiting our legislators to talk about an earmark for our deafblind program. Some of you remember earmarks. And our dear Senator Patty Murray helped initiate a several $1 million earmark for our deafblind program. But it was the first time I was there, I think, and it's very confusing. Every building has a different numbering system, and all those long marble hallways. And between meetings, I needed to visit the men's room. So we had some sighted folks with us, sighted guys. So hey, we had 15 minutes for our next meeting. I need a men's room. So I walk into the men's room. It's huge. You could throw a dance in there, and looking for the right place. So I find the sinks and paper towels, and I'm using my cane doing some structured discovery. I find a stall door. I say that'll work. I step in, and then I hear 2 sets of high heels marching briskly into the restroom. 2 stall doors shut, zippers, and I bolted out of the ladies' room in the Russell building.
Russell building. Welcome to advocacy in Washington, D.C., right? Yeah.
So Dan, on that note, I have nothing to follow Kirk with. So
I think we've all walked into the wrong
colleagues have
restroom
a lot.
a time or two.
Yes, we have.
Yes, we have.
Yes.
But not with sighted guide. Typically that doesn't happen with sighted guide.
Oh my goodness. So nothing to share, kid?
Can't come up. Must be because it's Sunday evening and I'm just tired now. So.
Well, hey,
Oh.
hey, thank you all. This has truly, truly been delightful. I hope that our membership has enjoyed it. I know I have. And, I now feel like I know you all so much better. So the next time I see you in, at the Vision Rehab conference, or I make you Vision Serve Alliance conference, or at a policy forum, I'll have a smile on my face. So, and thank you all for coming, and we really appreciate it from our bottom of our heart. We're the American Council of the Blind. So thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me,
Thank
Dan.
you, Dan.
Thanks,
All right.
ACB.
Thanks, Dan.
All right. Have a good evening. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.